Thank you, CarolinaAlumni. Thank you, Joe Patrizzi, Allison Deem. Welcome, everybody. We are so very pleased that you are here. I can't believe so many people have turned out when there seems to be absolutely nothing going on in the athletic department in the last 3 hours. I conjured up this session while walking through the woods last fall, and CarolinaAlumni's Allison Deem and Joe Patrizzi embraced it. It didn't hit me at the time, but I do believe there's something quite special about this gathering tonight. In the long history of this, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, I don't believe we've ever had 3 consecutive ADs on the same stage, and that spanning 30-some years. So this is a momentous evening. And addressing those here, not only did CarolinaAlumni take the ball and run with it, all 3 here tonight, the past, present, and future of one of the most successful athletic programs in college athletics, all of them, when asked, immediately said, yes, what can we do to help? That, to me, speaks volumes about who they are. Gathered with me, men who will have or will oversee some 750 student athletes and manage a budget of some $180 million. Men who will not only oversee 28 varsity sports, but will work with all aspects of the administrative bodies that are associated with this university. That in itself means they are in the middle of a 3-ring circus, and one without a net. Besides serving as ringmaster, their bios are crammed with superlatives, with success at every chapter of their career, not only athletically, but academically, socially. We are fortunate, most fortunate, to have them for not only all that they've done and will do, but all that they have protected us from over the years. Before introducing them, a quick word about Carolina's athletic program. We have won 52 NCAA team titles in 8 different sports. And those 52 include 22 in women's soccer, 11 in field hockey, 6 in men's basketball, 5 in men's lacrosse, 4 in women's lacrosse, 2 in men's soccer, and 1 in women's basketball and women's tennis. In addition, 13 times Carolina has won multiple NCAA team championships in the same, if you will, academic year or season. Most recently, that event took place 2024-25 when women's soccer and women's lacrosse won NCAA titles. The overall title of 52 is the 8th most in the country. And yes, of the 52, ladies, 39 of them have been won by women's teams. And a quick note to put our 28 varsity sports, 15 women and 13 men in perspective. Of the 361 schools that comprise Division I, the university's athletic program is the 12th largest and the 5th most among schools in the Power 4 conferences. I would dare say you might be surprised who's number 1. Harvard. One simply cannot imagine the day-to-day routine and demands of serving as athletic director here at Carolina. We hope to give you a better idea about just that later this evening. Finally, a quick historical word about the position. Since 1923, Carolina has had 7 ADs, and this summer we will have an 8th. Robert A. Fetzer was the first. followed by Chuck Erickson, Homer Rice, Bill Kobe, John Swafford, Dick Baddour, Bubba Cunningham, and our future in the hands of Steve Newmark. So enough nuts and bolts. Please help me to welcome our 6th, 7th, and soon-to-be 8th AD here at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. First, from our storied past, athletic director from 1997 to 2011. Here he has been a student, administrator in various departments, athletic director, and now serves as a professor of the practice. A staggering 64 years of official involvement with this university. Please welcome Goldsboro, North Carolina native Dick Baddour. Next, our current athletic director who is playing the so-called back nine, if you will. Under his tenure, over 2,000 student athletes have graduated. A native of Flint, Michigan, he has enhanced Carolina's national reputation by serving and heading numerous NCAA committees. Please say hi to Bubba Cunningham. Those two gentlemen, Dickie Baddour and Bubba, I might mention, as AD, this university has won 37 of its 52 NCAA titles under their leadership.
And we've never played again.
And finally, the future for the school's athletic program. Truly Tar Heel born and bred. He is from Chapel Hill, and his Carolina blue runs deep. Talented, savvy, a humanist, and perhaps I'm most proud to say one of my former students at Chapel Hill High School, who in spite of me is where he is. Please welcome the man who previously led one of the most successful teams in NASCAR history, Steve Newmark. Though their backgrounds and paths to this position differ, all three, without question, stress athletic and academic achievement, appreciate and support our faculty, believe in the role of higher education for developing men and women into future leaders, and without question again, love this university, its history, and its tradition. I entitled this session, The Glad, Sad, and Mad Roles as Athletic Director. And may I please offer 3 quotes that reflect the broad spectrum of duties this position demands, mimicking the good, the bad, the ugly. First, a glad quip. One of the best marketing spins ever, thanks to Dickie Baddour. It's a good day to be a Tar Heel. For the sad, I give you former Oklahoma State football coach Phil Cutchin, who quipped while he was stepping down to become a cattle rancher. He was quoted, "Cattle got no alumni." And for the mad, we don't have to look beyond our own conference. We turn to Clemson's legendary Frank Howard, who as AD famously refused to incorporate crew or rowing in the Tigers' athletic lineup when he said, "We ain't going to have no sport where you sit down and go backwards." And finally, a brief word about our game plan tonight. I've accumulated some 51 questions from several sources, including many that were kindly submitted by you. Not surprisingly, many of those questions asked revolve around NIL revenue sharing, conference realignment, a new basketball arena, and the job itself. Now, we could spend an entire night on those items alone, but I'm not sure your moms would allow you to have a sleepover. It's okay with my mom, but it's okay with yours. But if time allows, we will try to open the floor in our second session. At about 7:50 or so, we'll take a 10-minute break, and then we'll go as long as we have some momentum and steam. But that being said, we will turn into pumpkins at 9 o'clock. Again, on this historic night with these fine people, thank you for being here. And so we begin. In the past, when interviewing, I have been told to begin with a few softballs. Loosen up the interviewees. So with that in mind, Dick, Bubba, and Steve, here we go. For all three of you to respond to, other than Carolina blue, what's your favorite color?
No question, it's blue.
Yeah. Bubba, what you got?
Blue.
Blue. Navy, Carolina.
You just said you can't answer blue.
You said you couldn't say Carolina blue, so I said blue.
All right.
Dark blue.
Technicality.
Navy
Carolina
blue.
Carolina blue.
Carolina. Okay. Dickie?
Wait a minute, you said we couldn't say Carolina blue.
This is off to a good start, Freddie.
All right, sky blue.
Bubba, stay after class.
Sky blue. I'm glad I didn't have you for high school.
Navy blue.
Navy blue. Steve?
Royal blue.
Ooh. Royal blue.
I'm going to go different. I'm going to go purple.
Purple.
Yep. Dad was a Vikings fan, so I'm going to throw that out there.
I do remember that, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a Cleveland Browns fan. We know a lot of pain. Okay, second question. Of all the rock and roll bands you listened to over the course of your life, which band would you want to be the front man for? Anybody take it?
Fred,
Go ahead. No, don't.
on my 40th birthday, over 40 years ago, my wife and friends threw a confidential birthday party, well, until I got there. And I had said earlier in the year, when responding to a question, what would you like to do on your 40th birthday? I said, I'd like to have all my friends together. I'd like to have the Embers come sing. And I'd like to be able to walk up on the stage and sing with Jackie Gore and lead the Embers. So that's the easy one for me. I want to sing with
The
Raleigh's Embers, yeah.
Dickie has won awards in shagging, so he is well positioned for that particular band. Bubba or Steve?
Yeah. I think it would concern me because we have no musical talent in my family, and so it would. I'm worried that if we got up on stage, I would, inhibit the band. But if you're saying we can change the talent, I would go a band that some may know, the Avett Brothers, because they end up jumping around the stage.
The Avett Brothers,
so
North Carolina ties, of course.
Concord band.
Okay.
Concord, North Carolina.
Well, that's right, because you spent some time down that way. Bubba?
I don't know anything about music. I've never followed music.
Now, according to your wife, you just returned from a Luke McCombs
She went to the Luke Combs concert, but I would have to go with Eric Church. But in like the second grade, I met the greatest accordion player of all time from the Lawrence Welk Show. Anybody know who it is?
Yeah. Marlon?
Myron Florin.
Yes.
That's exactly right. I still have his card. Yeah, so Myron Florin, I guess, would have to be the only guy that I know.
Bubba, I don't believe I'd have told that.
That was my mom's favorite show. Even though the episode had been seen 60 times, my mom would settle in at 6 or 7 o'clock Saturday night and watch Lawrence Welk.
Yeah.
And the Champagne Dancers. Champagne music makers, yeah.
All right, Peter Fox from the Jay Giles Band.
Jay Giles Band.
Right,
good.
the
Okay.
drummer.
All right, very good. All right, last one. If Hollywood was about to make a movie of your life, who would you want to play? You.
He goes first this time.
That's great. I'm worried they would put Jason Alexander, the guy who played George Costanza from Seinfeld. That would concern me. But if I get an aspirational one that I get to choose,
Of course.
I'll I'm going to go Matt Damon because I love Goodwill
Matt
Hunting.
Damon.
So
Matt Damon.
We'll take
Okay.
that.
Gregory Peck.
Gregory
Yellow
Peck.
Mockingbird. Hey.
Very quick, no, just right off the tongue.
Bubba, are we back with the accordion player?
Close. George Wendt, Norm on Cheers.
Okay, now that we've loosened up,
Are we loose enough, Freddie?
I hope so. With apologies to Dickie and Bubba, a few questions to Steve to start us off as a means to allow him to introduce himself to you, being the newest member and our future athletic director. Steve, tell us about growing up here in Chapel Hill and your connection with Tar Heel athletics.
Certainly. Before I do that, I do want to tell you how much I appreciate being on stage with both of these guys. I think you mentioned 30 plus years, and the way I see it, I think it's 15, and then I got the plus for the few months. But it is an honor. Obviously, I've known Dickie. It's hard for me not to call him Mr. Baddour since I've known him since I was 3 or 4 for my entire life, and he's helped me quite a bit in my career. And we've talked a lot about this. And then one of the reasons that I ended up thinking that this transition was the right thing for me was that Bubba was going to be here. The respect I had for him that I've seen that he has in the industry, and that we would get to overlap for a period of time. I didn't think that I was going to be up with my former teacher listening. So, growing up in Chapel Hill, back when I did it, I mean, obviously a little bit of a smaller town, but the same kind of character and culture, and you basically have Carolina in your blood, and everything is around the university. And I was fortunate. We grew up in Colony Woods off Ephesus Church Road. The Baddours were behind us. I think Mike Roberts was down the street baseball coach at the time. I think Larry Brown lived down the street at one point. Yeah. Doug Moe's mom was, I think, down the street from you guys. The Guthridges. I mean, so it is just everything was Carolina, and that's just kind of how you ordered your life. It was about Carolina athletics. It was your ties to your family, your ties to your friends. And, I've told people this over the years that I can almost trace my development based on different Carolina games. Watching my dad cry in '77 when we lost to Marquette, and then, on Franklin Street in '82 on his shoulders. And so it just leaves an impact, and it becomes part of your identity. And so even though I've been in Charlotte for the last 28 years, I was always referred to as the Carolina guy down there. And even when I was in racing, my team would know, hey, we can't schedule. We've got to look at the UNC basketball schedule and UNC football schedule, because we're not going to schedule a dinner, a sponsor dinner or something like that, because he's not going to show up. So,
You mentioned Charlotte and your experience down there with NASCAR. How do you feel your NASCAR experience will help you, aid you in taking the reins here at Carolina as athletic director?
I hope it's provided a foundation. When I moved down to Charlotte, I'll give a little tangent. Moved down to Charlotte, we were choosing between Atlanta and Charlotte, and made a list of pros and cons of each. And on the con list for Charlotte, it said NASCAR not only on front page of sports page, but on front page of paper, and then big letters, not a sport. And so I knew nothing about NASCAR when I got involved in it, and made that transition. And so it was daunting for me because I didn't have a background, and I leapt into it, and was very fortunate to have a good supporting group there. And so I'm hoping that the fact that, I've had college experience before that with the SEC and the NCAA, but being able to have that experience of, hey, you got to dive in, you got to learn every detail, and you got to participate in it, will be a benefit. The other thing that there's a similarity with is in NASCAR, you have multiple teams. When I started, we had 9 teams, and every one of them wants more money, more resources, and thinks they don't have enough. And so all I've done here is just transition from 9 teams to 28 teams that feel the exact same way on a daily basis.
What are your priorities?
I think the primary priority is to stand on the shoulders of giants from Swafford to Baddour and Cunningham and continue what they've built. I mean, you mentioned the national championships, but to me, that's not the more impressive piece. If you look at what UNC is built on, it's built on the coaches and the student athletes. And then you weave that in with the academic piece. And, one of the things that I've been most impressed with is, when I got here, the mission statement is we educate and inspire through athletics. And to watch how that comes to life every day. And that, I know we're going to talk about NIL. I know we're going to talk about money. It has become a very important part of athletics. We can't avoid it. But what goes on a daily basis in the athletic department is everything that you would want. It's trying to assist these young, talented student athletes to be able to balance athletics, social, and academics. And you watch these kids just blossom, and they do so well in the classroom and so well on their respective field.
As you worked alongside Bubba this past year, any eye-opening surprises that perhaps you didn't expect?
Well, one surprise is he never sleeps. This man, he is, I tried when we were on a trip with our staff down to Clemson, and I realized I had been like 3 months into this, and I had never stayed later at any event than Bubba did. So I was convinced I'm going to make it past Bubba tonight. And so I think it was like 10:30, 11. I'm like, Bubba's not here. This is great. I went back to the hotel, later found out that he had just run out to take a call and came back in. But I think the most, I'm not sure it's the most surprising thing, but the most rewarding and fulfilling just gets back to that the mission of the athletic department hasn't changed from when Dickie led it. It is still academically oriented, and I know we're going to talk about different aspects of how it's changed from a commercial perspective and what we need to do to survive, but you really see the staff live it on a daily basis. And the foundation of the athletic department when I was growing up was the coaches. I mean, obviously you had Coach Smith, but it was Anson, it was Karen, it was Willie Scroggs, and that was the anchor. That was they were what kept the engine going and kept the continuity. And I think, I come here, and one of the things I was able to do when I got here in September, because we had this transition, I was able to get out and meet and spend time with each of the coaches and each of the assistants. And everyone, I just get blown away by their talent, their commitment, and their dedication to their kids.
Bubba, thank you for your patience thus far. But the other end of the bookend, before we turn things over to you and the NIL handout that you were so kind to present to us for publication, so to speak. Dickie, question for you. We have all perhaps said it, we have all perhaps heard it, that Coach Dean Smith has spun out of his grave and is across Raleigh Road in the intramural fields by now. Do you agree with the fact that Coach Smith would be so incredibly opposed and upset with what college has become as far as athletics?
I'm not sure about that, Freddie, but in responding about change, I had the wonderful opportunity to work with Coach Smith and President Bill Friday. And so when I think about them and their impact on the institution, they were innovators. They were about change. If you think about Coach Smith and his aggressiveness on integration with Charles Scott, and integration that's on the university side, but within the community as well. And you think about Mr. Friday and his innovation. I mean, he takes a higher education organization that consists of UNC, NC State, and Greensboro, and that gets changed into the 16-campus organization that we have now and a board of governors and all that it took. So both of those gentlemen were steeped in change and adjustment, and yet there are some things about them that were at their core. And I think they would anywhere from concern to be upset about. Number one, I would say that those two led the effort across the ACC to have no alcohol-related advertising and marketing as it related to higher education, our teams participating, and being associated with beer. It was just unheard of. So if Coach Smith and Mr. Friday were to try to deal with the notion of a sponsored beer as official sponsor, that would be difficult for him. I'm not saying that's a negative thing. I'm just saying, and for those two gentlemen, it would be very hard. I think another issue for them would be the aggressiveness in signage. And we spent a year looking at that. And during my administration, we broke that barrier, you might say. And it was in a limited way, but we broke that barrier. And we spent a year with faculty involvement and alumni involvement. And so when I went to Coach Smith and then went to Mr. Friday about it, they both said to me, it's ironic, they both said the same thing. I'll not fight you on it. But if I'm asked about it, I will say how I feel. And they were willing to say that, they wanted to say that they felt like that was a mistake, because the implication to them was that the commercialization would bring control outside the institution. And that notion for them would have been very difficult. Where I know they would be frustrated or against would be on the gambling side. And just that athletics across the state would receive any kind of funding from gambling would be upsetting to them, no question about it. What we know about them is that they both were teachers, and they believed in the educational process, and they were very proud. They measured success in teaching by graduation rates. So as the transfer in and out would impact graduation rates, that would be troubling for them. And yet they were changers, they were change agents, and so maybe on all of these they could find a way to come along. I'll tell you an interesting story about Coach Smith and signage. So I'm sitting in my office one day, and he comes in and says, "Dick, I thought you said there would be no signage in the Smith Center." And I said, "Coach, there is no signage in the Smith Center." He said, "Oh, yes, there is too." I said, "Coach, there is no signage." He said, "Yes, I think you guys call it the concourse, up on the concourse area. I was up there walking around." He said, "You want me to show you?" And I said, "Please, let's go." So I walk out of the office, get on the elevator, we go up, we walk down the hall, and the signage that he was talking about, it was a Coca-Cola vending machine. I can't make this up. That's what I was dealing with, Fred.
All right, it's time for all three to jump in, but before we get to Bubba and his helping us understand NIL, we have a question from our folks out here, from Bill from Greensboro, and it involves all three of you. Dickie, back in 1997, do you recall what were the priorities of the search committee when they were evaluating you for the position of AD?
Oh, I'm certain I know what they were. It's what our history was and what we stood for. One would be, does he understand how important academic success is to us in terms of our student athletes, and will he promote and provide those kind of opportunities and support services in place? Number two was, we expect to win. We want to win. So can he supervise, manage the sport program? Will he buy into, which I already had. I've been assistant AD for 10 years, but does he get it about the importance of supporting the sport programs? And another thing would be, we want to do things the right way. And that to them would have meant not just compliance, but being a good ambassador within the university and without the university. Fred, as I was coming along, faculty engagement here was really, really important. And so my history at the university had been so much involved with faculty that was an easy thing for me to do because I knew that world and that world knew me. So I would, and in budget. We were used to operating with a tight budget, with getting more out of the resources that we had, and so I think those would have been the priorities for me, for them.
Okay. Bubba, most likely you were evaluated by similar priorities. Were many of those hiring points de-emphasized or modified when later in your tenure so many changes came to the college athletic landscape?
No, the values are still the same, and they were the same when asked about coming. It was about valuing the broad-based programming, the academic integrity of what we were doing and how our students were progressing. But what has accelerated in the last 15 years is the commercial activity. And I remember when I first got here, very early, I went to a Rotary meeting over in Cary. And just very innocently, we had a $70 million budget when I got here. And they said, what do you think the budget should be? Because I was talking about 2018, more than most and a little bit behind. And I said, well, I don't know. I think it's probably $100 million. I think is probably what we would need to really be competitive. Faculty called me before I got home to say, what are you talking about? We're not having a $100 million budget. But so I do think trying to balance where we are in a very competitive environment where the commercial activity is continuing to grow, yet trying to maintain that balance. And there's always been a tension on campus between intercollegiate athletics and academics, just your time allocation. But what we've really seen in the last 10 to 15 years is really a financial tension, an economic tension between what we're doing and the rest of the academy. And that is a challenge that we're going to continue to face.
Full circle, Steve. Were any items in the priorities that Dickie mentioned a part of the evaluation process for you?
Yeah, I think the discussions that I had with Bubba and the chancellor and other members were very similar. I think Dickie said academic integrity, emphasis on winning, doing it the right way, and then fiscally responsible. I think probably the difference is there was a large discussion about how do you adapt the current way that we operate and the way that we've operated for a number of years to maintain those in a completely different landscape and a completely different environment. And so, quite frankly, I mean, I think doing it the right way, being academically focused, is actually easy to do at Carolina. I mean, it's embedded in everything we do, but the emphasis on winning and being fiscally responsible have almost, the tension there is fairly significant. And, you know, I think there's a lot of people that would love to say we should operate the way, you know, we did under Coach Smith or we did in the 80s. And we can make that choice and do that. The problem is if we do that, we have to understand that we may not be able to support 28 programs and they may not be competitive. And because you just have to look in the marketplace and I wish I could wave my magic wand and, you know, let's all say that you can't spend more than this, but you've got, our budget's very healthy. I mean, you took it from 70 to 180 to 200. I mean, that's a pretty massive increase. We're competing against schools in the SEC. I mean, Texas is $360 million. You've got schools that are at Tennessee, 260, Ohio State's over there. And so it's just it's a tension that we've got to make choices about what we want to be as we move forward. And there was a lot of discussion about, okay, how can we continue to maintain everything that we hold dear and be more entrepreneurial so we don't just be a drain on the university from a fiscal perspective.
Okay, everybody buckle up because we're getting ready to dive into the rabbit hole. Bubba, you prepared a handout for us that's quite informative. Can you help us understand how this Wild West arms race came about?
No.
Oh. Moving right along.
Well, you know, for 100 years of the NCAA, and again, probably 30 years more specifically, we've changed everything through legislation. So we'd have one school, one vote. We'd go to the convention. We'd vote on legislation, whether it was progress toward degree or an academic requirement. And what we've seen in the last 25 years is a much more rapid change in college athletics through litigation instead of legislation. And so those lawsuits that are articulated there are the ones that have really flipped the switch for us. So the Alston case, which is the first one listed, and people have lost track of what is the Alston case. The Alston case was basically about educational benefits. It said you shouldn't have limits on the educational benefits, and if you do, it should at least be equal to your athletic benefits. And so what they did is they talked about if you win an ACC championship, a national championship, and the Heisman Trophy or the MVP, and you get all these awards, that's worth almost $6,000. So if you can give them $6,000 worth of athletic awards, you should be able to give them at least that much in academic awards. That was the Alston case. Then you had
by the way, I wish we were back where it was just $6,000 per student.
All right. Then you have the O'Bannon case. So that was name, image, and likeness. Say we had this video game out there. It looks like me. It's UCLA. I'm playing basketball, but I don't get any royalty from that. That's a violation of a right. And so the students should have the right to monetize their NIL. And so we lost that case. And so what did we do at that point? Pay the kids? No. We quit making the video game. That's how we solved the problem. We quit selling jerseys and we quit with the video game. And so now we've realized, oh, wait a minute, that's not going to work. So that continued down the path. And so then California passed the Fair Right to, I can't remember what it's called, Fair Right to Play Work Act, so you could pay them basically. So to get ahead of that, the NCAA passed an NIL rule that said we could provide NIL. The kid could go out and get their own NIL. And we've heard about that for many years. Well, if you play in a band, you can, go and play in a band on weekends, you can make money. Well, we knew in college athletics that's not going to hold the way the aggressive nature of people are in athletics. You're going to try to win. So the NIL got out of hand very, very quickly. But that was the precursor to NIL. And then obviously the House case was the one that we took all the way to the Supreme Court and we lost. And then Kavanaugh came in on top and said, you've been in violation of antitrust for 40 years. And we've deferred to you for good judgment to change rules that you thought were in the best interest of the students, but you've demonstrated you can't do that. We're going to come in over the top of you. And so that's what we've been dealing with in the last 5 years, is the settlement of the House case. And so that's when NIL really shot to the moon, and that's where we're headed right now. So there's virtually no cap on the NIL stuff right now. That's a real nutshell of the last 25 years.
Wow. Well, we're going to address more of that. We do have a question from Dr. Greg, who's one of our attendees. Can Carolina successfully exceed the $20.5 million a year cap to pay our athletes and still be in compliance with the College Sports Commission?
Well, that is something that Dickie and I don't have to worry about anymore.
Steve, I think the buck just got passed.
I think, unfortunately, the answer is yes, and we have to if we want to remain competitive. There is a system because of the intricacies of the House. We can pay $20.5 million. I think it goes to $21.3 million next year that the university can pay to the athletes. But then there's a whole system that those athletes, those student athletes, still have the opportunity to go out and sell their name, image, and likeness and do personal services and be an ambassador for a brand and generate revenue that way. And so what we have seen in the last year is a lot of confusion out there about how that's going to be enforced because they set up, and I'm not sure what Bubba gave you, but I might need to read it as well. But the CSC is supposed to be out there enforcing, but we didn't give, the NCAA and the courts didn't give them the power to go do that. And so we kind of have a mess out there with different schools having different interpretations. But I do think there's a way, and all the schools are looking at how do we make sure that our athletes can properly go out and monetize, what their visibility is as a student athlete. And so it is taken on an increased focus that I think we'd all prefer that we didn't have. Right. But I think that's the reality. And you hear numbers of SEC schools paying their college roster $40 million. And because there's no transparency, unlike in the pros where you can look up exactly what each player is getting paid, that doesn't exist in college. And so sometimes you don't know, it's hard to discern truth from fiction. And so that's really what we're wrestling with. But at the same time, we do have folks in the athletic in the athletic department that are working with women's lacrosse players, women's field hockey players who have raised their hands and said, I want to be entrepreneurial. I want to go out. We have a women's tennis player who I think has 3 million followers on TikTok. And she, if she was a regular student and, wasn't a student athlete, she would be out, figuring out ways to monetize that. And so we're trying to help her do the same thing.
Also from Dr. Gregg, can our boosters form collectives to augment payment to athletes over and beyond the $20.5 million cap?
Take that one.
Yeah, and that's what started. When the NIL became legal for student athletes, collectives were formed, and boosters got together and collected money,
Right.
and then tried to figure out a way to let the student monetize their name, image, and likeness. So advertise for their company, maybe come and do autographs, maybe do appearances, things of that nature. And so what we're trying to deal with now is boosters have gotten so close to our student athletes because they were allowed to. It's how do you give them the rev share and create legitimate NIL deals? And we're seeing them being manufactured. So yes, you can, but anybody that signs an NIL contract, any student athlete, it has to go into a thing called NIL Go, which is run by Deloitte, and it should have a fair market value or a range of compensation that's appropriate for that activity for that amount of money. But they're overwhelmed with it, and it's new. And what is the market? I think that's 13% is what I read this. 13% of the NFL players have NIL contracts beyond their professional sports contract. Well, 95% of our football and basketball players in Division I have some kind of an NIL deal. So it's a fabricated market because we don't have a draft and we don't really have a salary cap. So we're wrestling with all these lawsuits, and the NCAA, again, I've mentioned it, the violation of antitrust has happened twice. It happened in 1984 when Oklahoma and Georgia sued the NCAA for television rights. And the Supreme Court said, yes, the NCAA is in violation of antitrust. Schools and conferences should have the ability to sell their television rights independently. So that's antitrust violation 1. Antitrust violation 2 was the House case where we were declared that we're restricting the rights of individual students to monetize their NIL. So that was the second time. That's what has created the problem. But the collectives, we're having trouble separating the collectives from real NIL deals today.
One last very appropriate question from Dr. Gregg. What percentage of our roughly 750 student athletes receive pay-to-play money?
All of them.
I knew it was
Alex Brandywine, who's, you guys know Brandywine's Bagels, as soon as NIL came into existence, he offered an NIL package to every one of our student athletes.
Wow.
If you would advertise for Brandywine Bagels, you get free bagels when you came. So every single one of our student athletes, and what a business he's built. It's unbelievable what he's been able to do. So, but if you really look at it, there's about, I'd say, almost half of our student athletes have some type of an NIL deal. And some of them are very lucrative, particularly the Olympic sport ones that Steve mentioned. Some of our women's sports have done really well. And I think we may have the only coach in the country who actually monetized NIL when she was a player, and now she's coaching, and Erin Matson. Because she was the first year of it, and she did monetize her own NIL, which was pretty cool. Wow. So now she can educate our older coaches on how you go about doing this.
And I think it's important, though, that the range, I mean, we hear a lot of the big numbers, and we're seeing it in the basketball transfer portal right now, that some of the numbers are actually getting bigger than what you see in the NBA. But for the vast majority of that, roughly 50%, these may be $1,000 deals to do a licensing deal, or, they're very small. And, a lot of these kids get extremely excited when they, find out that they're going to get $2,000 to go do an appearance for this business. And so there is kind of there's actually an educational component to some of, I think, these smaller deals, because they learn how to interact with businesses. They learn they have to do a contract. They learn a lot of life skills that will serve them later. But I think there's no doubt that we've got some that I think would fall within what most of us would say is the legitimate ability of these kids to take advantage of what they've worked so hard for, but we also have where the scale in some cases has just gotten a little bit out of control.
Right, so back to sorry to interrupt, but the basketball video game that was the O'Bannon case. Sure. So those basketball players, now we have video games again. So every one of our students that are in a basketball video game had to sign a release and get their NIL payment. You know what the NIL payment is for every basketball player? $600. So that, to Steve's point. And then the jersey sales is the other one. You can imagine how much money I'd make if we could have jersey sales? Well, a jersey, this is actually low. Say it's a $100 jersey. Well, that's retail. You pay licensing on wholesale, which is about half of that, so that's $50. And the licensing fee is about 20%. So now you're talking about $10, and then you split that. $5 goes to the university for their logo on the front, and $5 goes to the kid because their name's on the back. So every jersey you sell for $100, the kid gets $5. Wow. So it's not as if they're going to make millions of dollars on this, even though it's a billion-dollar industry and all those things. But once you start breaking it down, the money is not that significant for just most student athletes. Now, the elite ones in the top sports are making a lot of money.
What do you guys think? All three of you can respond. What has to be, what event, what piece of legislation do you believe has to be the tipping point where someone starts to try to corral or to give some degree of limiting the whole process of NIL?
Well, I think probably all three of us hope that we hit that breaking point soon. I think that, the way we're operating right now is not sustainable for a 5-10 year period. And so, I think we're hearing a lot of noise from Congress and the president because you're starting to hear these stories that I think are, disturbing to people about how some of the economics are working. But I will say, because we've talked a lot about Bubba's tenure, and one of the things, because Bubba will continue on his special projects, and one of the key pieces that Bubba's going to focus on is trying to help facilitate a national solution to this, whether it's collective bargaining, legislation. Bubba has more ties to probably athletic directors throughout the country than anyone around, and so that's one of the things that he'll focus on. So with that said, what's the solution? Yeah.
I'm not sure of the solution. Well, I have some ideas on what the solution might be, but I think it's a really good question. I don't think we're there yet. I think, and I went back and really studied Too Big to Fail. And I feel like we're 2007, 2008 again in a different industry. We're over-leveraged. We have risky financial practices. We don't have great government regulation. And something's going to happen, whether Lehman Brothers, something will happen that will trigger it. It's a major college drops football. A major conference goes under. And I thought maybe the Big 12 or the Pac-12 would be that one. But I don't think we've quite hit that crisis yet that will force it. We're trying to get some stuff through Congress, and I think the executive order I actually think is pretty helpful. It kind of hits the right notes. I don't think it's going to make a huge impact yet, but I do think we're getting close to some failure that says we have to stop this, and we'll have some type of governmental intervention to buoy it. But it is too big to fail. Our reputation, Michigan's, Texas, is built on our athletic programs. And so institutionally, as we have this $20 million rev share that we're doing, the university is subsidizing this. You'd never in your wildest dreams thought the university would subsidize athletics. And Steve, I thought, said it really, really well when he got asked a question a while back about, I can't believe you're paying your football coach or basketball coach that much. He said, well, football and basketball are fine. They make more than they spend. It's the other sports I'm worried about. And so that's going to be the crisis that is going to force somebody to do something different.
They know the answers better than I can even attempt to, but I'll have a couple of observations. My first year, we operated in the red, and what we had to answer to is unbelievable. We had a financial task force, faculty, staff, administrators, and so forth. And what I described in my opening comments was the way it was. But it ain't that way anymore. And what's hard for you, not only to understand it, is to grasp it, but is to say, I want to support this. That this is important to me now as it was to me 30 years ago. And that's really hard. The way I look at it is, do you want to survive or do you want to thrive? And we're not used to just surviving.
Yep.
So we want to thrive, and it's a different day, it's a different leadership. So we've got to adopt this. We have some core values. The core values are doing it the right way, academic success, 28 sports. That matters to us. And we want to do all we can to not endanger that. You mentioned the number of women's sports and their national championships. Yep. This institution is very proud of that. From the very beginning, when Homer Rice and John Swafford put some effort and money into that, we're reaping the benefit of that. So we can't take our eyes off the ball. The other thing, or I say the thing we don't have on the national level, in my view, is that we don't have a leader. We don't have a spokesperson who can do an absolutely wonderful job of pulling all of this together, all these schools, Congress, whatever it takes, to pulling together a unified force and coming up with kinds of solutions that we can all agree to.
That's extremely well said. I do want to comment. I know if I'm sitting in your shoes, it's kind of depressing, and I don't want you to think that we become professional sports, because I've gotten that question a lot, and I would unequivocally argue all day long that our athletes are nowhere near in the same category of professional athletes. They are still student athletes, and you still see them come to campus nervous, getting acclimated to a new place, having a new roommate that they didn't know. Even some of the ones that make a ton of money are still going through the same things that most of us went through when we went to college. Caleb Wilson is probably the best example. Obviously, he's very well compensated, both through the university and through his endorsement deals. He's still a freshman. He shows up at everything. He has an enthusiasm, an exuberance. He's throwing out first pitch at our baseball game and gets excited. He's on stage at the Rammies. He's trying to soak in. Before the Savannah Banana games, he said to me, this has been the single greatest year of my life. I can't believe I don't get to do it next year.
He can.
And so, yeah. He can, yeah. I'm not sure we have that much money, by the way. We have a lot of money. We don't have that much. But the right thing for him is to go on, and we're still having that impact on a lot of these student athletes. And that's I've dealt with a lot of professional athletes, whether it was in racing at the Red Sox, and it's a fundamentally different approach. The other thing that I would mention is we haven't lost the fact that UNC still has a different threshold and different standards through which we evaluate a lot of the student athletes that come in here. I was amazed in the fall. One of the first things, or maybe middle of the things that I went to was the dinner for the men's and women's team that had the highest GPA. And watching these kids on the men's lacrosse team was the first time they had won it. And Coach Bresci come in here. They were all day out dressed up, and it was a massive accomplishment. And then to hear the competition that goes on between the kids and the coaches to see who gets the highest GPA. In fact, I think there was almost a controversy because fencing realized it may lose its title to lacrosse, and so they were almost going to have a kid try to drop a class so they could get the GPA up. That might not be in the spirit of what we're trying to accomplish, but those things still go on. And then I'll tell you one more anecdote that hopefully is more uplifting than what we're talking about with the dollars, is transfer portal is undergoing right now. We hire Coach Malone, actually hire him, have the press conference, and then tell him, all right, you need to go in the conference room because the portal opened this morning and you have no roster. You have to put one together. And so he goes through this process. I think we've gotten a fairly good roster so far. But I would go over there every afternoon just to check on that group and his assistants on how they were doing. They had their big board up there. And he mentioned to me that there was a kid's name that I had seen up there one day and it was no longer on there the next day. And I said, what happened? Did he sign with somebody else? And Coach Malone said, no. He actually wanted to come here. His agent was a player that Coach Malone had coached in the pros. And I said, well, what happened? He said, well, called up and he said he wanted to be clear that he was a basketball player first and a student second. And Coach Malone said, I told him that's fantastic. He is an amazing basketball player, maybe an amazing person, but this isn't the right place for him. And so those type of assessments still go on. Doesn't mean we always make the right assessments, but it is still part of how our coaches are approaching this kind of crazy world.
It's 7:55, and we've got realignment, arena, and a few other things to talk about. Take a 10-minute break, and then we'll see you back at about 8:04, and we will continue this wonderful evening. Please stand and take a break. Welcome back.
Thank you.
Okay, before we move to the arena, Bubba, please enlighten us a little more between the difference between NIL and revenue sharing.
Okay, so I mentioned a bunch of different lawsuits, one of which was the House case. And so we settled the House case. We didn't lose that one. We lost all the other ones. So the House case, we settled that, and that was a $2.8 billion settlement that the NCAA owes former student athletes that didn't have the ability to monetize their NIL. And that is going to be paid over 10 years. So $280 million the NCAA is going to pay to athletes from the previous 10 years that weren't able to monetize their NIL. That's the lawsuit settlement. Settlement going forward is that we can pay 22% of our commercial revenue to our current student athletes. That equates to $20.2 million. And that's a national average. It's not specific to Carolina, but the $20.5 million is what all schools can pay their current student athletes. Then we can divide that up any way we see fit for our student athletes. The $2.8 billion is being divided to those student athletes, 25% to, 75% to football, 15% to men's basketball, 5% to women's basketball, 5% to everybody else. We chose to distribute ours based on the percentage of revenue created by those sports for Carolina. So in our case, 65% is football, 35% is men's basketball, and then we have a small amount for baseball and women's basketball. And it's predicated on how much we generate in those individual sports. So that's rev share. So 20.5 we
Before
can
you
share.
leave that, would you explain it's not new money? Nobody's
correct.
giving you that $20 million.
Good point. That is what we're allowed to do in this fiscal year if you want to do it. And
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a notable point. We should hammer it a little bit more. So if you looked at last year, Bubba and the athletic department had basically balanced their budget, and then the House settlements passed, and it basically says if you want to compete, you have a $20.5 million expense that has no revenue, no way to generate any revenue. You just have to pay $20.5 million. And so it was, I think it's a really good point, because I think you guys were in a pretty decent spot, and then all of a sudden to be like any business that you're operating, that you basically just have a fee you have to pay of $20.5 million to continue operating the same way you were doing the week before.
Right. Yeah, so last year's budget was $160 million, this year's $180. That was where the gap comes. So that's rev share, so we can share that. That's our revenue share. Then the NIL is anything that collectives or sponsors or people create opportunities for our student athletes to monetize their NIL. And there's no cap on that. It just has to meet that range of compensation that I mentioned earlier through Deloitte. You put your contract in there, you say how much it is, and the things that you have to do to earn that money. And they say yes or no to that contract. If they say no, then you can resubmit it and do more things, but that's the only way you can get a contract approved for above and beyond the rev share. And we're all struggling to find ways to get more money to these students to get them on your roster.
Now you may have, I'm sorry, Steve, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and I think that, I mean, it's a great delineation, but for the coaches right now, what they're all trying to do is they feel like they need to have enough money to field a competitive roster. Sure. And I think we just went through an exercise where I think we've now sat with 19 of the 21 coaches to talk about what their needs are. And every one of them has come in there and has said, hey, listen, here's what the top 10 schools, we believe, are giving to their kids through rev share, through NIL. For us to be competitive, we need to do that. And it's kind of a double-edged sword. Yeah. Most schools, they're not always comparing themselves to top 10, but almost all of our sports have national championship aspirations, as they should. And so when they have that, they're not comparing themselves to the 50th percentile in Division I. They're comparing themselves to the top 10. And so that's where I think when I started, one of the first things Bubba said to me is, he said, I just did the rev share allocation for next year, and I made 5 people really unhappy, 5 people really unhappy. The 4 coaches of football, men's basketball, women's basketball, and baseball, and the new AD. And then we were laughing about this because we just went through these meetings or going through these meetings with all 21 coaches to talk about what we can do. And I told him I one-upped him because I'm now going to have 21 coaches completely unhappy with me. So.
Well, you perhaps may have answered this, Bubba, but how can a school give almost of its revenue share to football, men's basketball, without violating Title IX?
It's a great question, and we don't know because we haven't faced the lawsuit yet. Nobody has, but the argument I would make is that our educational benefits are equitable, our experiences are equitable, but the commercial activity associated with the sport is distributed by those that generated it. And I recognize that the law says it doesn't matter where the revenue comes from, it needs to be distributed equitably. But in this case, you've got a commercial activity that has a legal binding settlement that's distributing the money 75, 15, 5, and 5, and we're going to hope that that holds up. The reality is also that we have a very conservative executive branch that oversees the Department of Justice and Department of Education, and the chance of a lawsuit or Title IX lawsuit coming in the next 2 years is fairly limited. Now, 2 years from now, Steve's got another big problem.
Okay, ball of wax, revenue sharing, NIL. From another one of our folks out there, Bill, question as to the arena. As to the possibility of renovation or building a new basketball arena on or off campus, in your opinion, is the university listening to any of the feedback by numerous committees and petitions? Or is it a done deal and all of this is lip service as far as a new arena and entertainment at Carolina North? Oh boy.
I think, so anybody, you guys want to take that question? I'll try to give the first answer and then maybe let Bubba talk about it a little more. Obviously, came in August. I think this was 3 years into the process of evaluating. Actually, I say 3 years. Bubba will talk about how it started actually in 2012. But Kevin Gustowitz had started the process of looking at new arena options, Carolina North, the different potential places for a new arena along with renovation. And I do think there is no question that there was a lot of momentum after those 3 years that had been, a fairly broad-based studies had been done, and it had involved a number of people. But then I think even Bubba will acknowledge there was a kind of a communication stalled once Belichick was hired, and there was federal funding issues. And throughout that process, I think at the end there was a trend that, hey, Carolina North looks like is where the right location is and the choice of the university. I think, and Dick and I talked a lot about this, and he said, hey, I think you need to have more voices involved. You need to, there's some people that don't feel like they were heard during that 3-year process. And so that really started up, and I think it worked as it should. Those voices, and there was a lot more Carolina stakeholders that got involved, and the pause button was hit. There's been a number of groups that have been convened since then, starting to look at 7 options, trying to narrow it down. And I do think all of those voices were being heard. I think, though, then once what happened is once we had the situation with Coach Davis and hiring a new coach, it was like, hey, we need to step back. We have more immediate concerns, and we have to rally as a community to fix the short-term issues. And I think you'll see the arena piece continue to ramp up. But I don't think it's a foregone conclusion. If that was the case, they would have pulled the Band-Aid off in December, and they would have taken the heat and moved on.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. So, but a little more on the ideas back in 2012, 2013. You know, when I first got here, you guys Dickie had just opened the Blue Zone. And I was looking at that thinking, you know, the Blue Zone, between the personal seat licenses and the price of the tickets and the way that sold out immediately, that generates about $2.5 million more than the debt service requirement. And I was thinking, boy, if you can generate that kind of money on premium space at football at Carolina, imagine what you could do in basketball. And I knew at that point the arena was about 30 years old, thinking at some point we're going to have to do something with basketball, add premium or do something. So I went out and did all kinds of research about putting a new basketball arena in the Bowles parking lot. And it fit. It was pretty narrow, but it did fit in there. And so we actually took it to a couple of different places in Greensboro and Richmond and a few other places to meet with donors to talk about it. And they said, you know, we've got that academic thing going on. Now is not the time to do it. You shouldn't even consider that. So we took it off the table as something to consider. And so, but then we were just starting the university-wide campaign. And so we needed some facility projects. And so what we did is we said, let's focus on the Olympic sports and do everything we can for Olympic sports. That's when we built the indoor facilities, soccer, lacrosse, moved field hockey, and did the track down at Finley and the extra practice fields. And so we said, all right, put it all on hold. Don't even talk about a basketball arena until the campaign is over. Then when the campaign's over, let's go back and refocus on a basketball arena and how you're going to bring that thing up to speed after 40 years. And so that's where we were. And then Steve has talked about the rest of it. I think that we had some momentum to think about it. All the revenue things that we're talking about here, when you do the math on a brand new arena in an entertainment district, the financial model of that looks significant that can really help all the things that we're talking about. So if you just look at it purely from a math standpoint, it makes a lot of sense. But I think we discounted the emotion to it, the walkability, all the other things that have surfaced. And I think Dickie and Steve are right in saying we need more voices in the conversation. And that's what we're hearing now. So by no means is it a done deal.
Okay. Dickie, you have any feelings that you would like to share about the arena?
Settle in. I've heard these before.
They know how I feel. And it's public that I signed that letter. And I told Steve in advance, I apologized to Bubba. I didn't get to him before I signed it, and I should have. And I felt strongly about it. And there's some things that I would like, they know this, I'd like to see. I'd like a sort of a roll up your sleeve and let's really dig into these numbers so that we know that we can put worth in them. But more than that, for me, I'm bothered, troubled by the discomfort in our community. I'm bothered by the division. I'm not saying one side's right and the other one isn't, but we've got to find a way to come together. We're too strong when we're together. And whether we use the Smith Center relocation or whatever, we just need to put our heads together and say, how do we all get on the same page and endorse whatever it is we do, and now let's go do something else, and let's do it well. Bubba was right years ago to start a review of the Smith Center, and was this the best arena for us in this location or what? That's a very smart thing to do, in my opinion. But let's find a way. We got a new basketball coach. Let's find a way to get together on this thing.
One of the first things Bubba said to me when he was kind of bringing me up to speed is, I'm going to tell you in advance that there is no perfect solution. Every option, even though there are 7 options on the table, everyone has pros and everyone has cons. And so some of this is going to be what you value most. And that's probably why we saw it divide so many people, because it's not a completely clean. I think in an ideal world, we would have 50 acres that we could develop right in the middle of campus, and you put an arena there, and you build a district, and you put school buildings there. It's just not the reality. All of that said, and I told this to Bubba and Dickie, is we were in the middle of this process. There was all the videos going. There was all the controversy, and I got a call from a friend of mine who I'd worked in the Fenway organization, so one of the Boston Red Sox execs called me and said, hey, I just read about this in the national news, and I started going, lamenting, oh, I can't believe this, and he said, stop for a second. He said, I went to this other school up in the Northeast. There's no way they would ever authorize us to build an arena. And what you're telling me is you have a community, a donor base, politicians, board of trustees that believe so much in basketball that despite all the financial struggles of academic institutions, they're willing to say, let's go figure out and build the best-in-class arena and potentially spend 600 to 800 million. And you guys you're complaining about that? You guys need to reframe what you're looking at. You guys have something that no one else in the country has because of the support base that you have. He said, if we tried to go do that at my school, people would laugh at us. So.
That's interesting. Now that we're in the briars, in light of recent events, one of the toughest aspects of your job might just be making the decision to let someone go and hiring another. How did and how do you approach those kind of very tough decisions, which I would think would be the worst part of what you have to do as an athletic director? How do you move through something like that?
That's hard. That's the hardest thing we do. Personnel decisions are the hardest things we do.
No question. They really are. And you have to remind yourself of what your job is, what you've been asked to do, and you accepted the responsibility. And you've accepted the responsibility of being a steward over 28 sports. And so your obligation is to the University of North Carolina. And so you don't ever put the University of North Carolina in an embarrassing situation or in a situation where you wish it hadn't been so. And that's not the case typically on personnel decisions unless there's an NCAA issue or fraud or something like that. So from my point of view, you have to dig deep. You have to, if you're going to dismiss somebody, then you have to spend the time to know what the situation is, and it's not just about winning and losing. And if it's something that can be fixed, then you have to figure out, can I fix this? And what does that mean to the program? You obviously have to have your eye and heart and whatever else you have to the head coach. And it may be that keeping the head coach is the best thing for the program. But and I know it sounds elementary, but in the heat of all of that, when you wake up in the morning or when you go to bed at night, you've got to say to yourself, my job, my responsibility is to do what's best for this program. Then you have to take the heat one way or the other.
That's the speech he gave me, actually, probably when we were a week into the assessment.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, I think in any business, I mean, it's amplified in sports because it's going to be in the headlines, but in any business, the most difficult decision is when to part ways with an employee. And I think that where I came from before, we always kind of had the mantra that we would much rather wait too long to do it than do it too early. So to give people as many chances as possible. And I think I saw that when talking to Bubba. I mean, that kind of philosophy is that although the primary responsibility is to the university is made up of the people who work here and who participate in it. And so, I think we also owe it to each of them to give them as many chances to thrive and succeed. And so I feel like we feel comfortable that process played out in the right way, but there's no doubt that decision and any of them like them are extremely difficult.
And personally, it was really hard, very hard.
Yeah.
I mean, Hubert's an unbelievable guy. Leslie's fantastic. Gracie, Elijah, Micah. It's a wonderful family, and you're with them a lot. And the memories that he created for us, I mean, back-to-back over Coach K, his last game, the Final Four, what we all experienced in New Orleans, I mean, it's hard to replicate that.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it was the inconsistency. It was inconsistent from year 1 to 3 to 5, 2 and 4 were not good. And it was really hard. And so to Dickie's point, what are we going to do to be consistent? And men's basketball has to be consistently good. That's what we are known for nationally. It's a huge revenue driver for us. And ultimately, and it was great working with Steve all year. And I'm glad we had the 9 months together and the basketball season together. We were at every game. We were with them pre-game, post-game, traveling with them. So we had a pretty good sense of what was going on. And ultimately had to make the decision or the recommendation to the chancellor, and then had to turn our attention. Look, he's a great guy before he got here, a great guy while he's here, a great family, even though he's not the head coach. The only difference is he's not the head coach anymore. He's still a wonderful person, wonderful family, great Tar Heel, which is fantastic. And so then we go on and do the search, and Steve led that search, and I thought did a phenomenal job in that because we had a great list, and we ended up with a fantastic coach that, as he articulated in the press conference, that it was the first guy he called. And every search has different twists and turns, and you've had many of those as well. Every one of us have. But we landed a great coach, and we're excited about the future now.
Another pot that's simmering on the back of the Carolina oven, realignment. Is realignment still something that is being discussed about possibly moving somewhere else? And in that same light, would it be difficult for all of these folks to imagine being in a conference that did not include NC State or Duke?
So to answer the first part, I mean, I think you constantly have to stay abreast and continue to discuss the possibilities. Otherwise, you're doing a disservice, because if you get complacent, you're going to be left behind. That doesn't mean you make a decision. You just need to understand your options. And, I think you have to monitor where the landscape's going. I think I shouldn't speak for both of them, but I think our preference would be, if you have a strong ACC that you can remain in. I mean, my preference would be we were still 8 teams, and we were playing in the Big Four tournament in Greensboro before the season starts.
Yeah.
But that's not the reality. I mean, it's interesting. We talk about the ACC, which I think we're extremely proud, and it's a great academic conference, but it doesn't look anything like what any of us grew up with. If I told you were going to have Boston College, you were going to go to Boston, to Syracuse, to San Francisco, Palo Alto, Dallas, Miami, and that was all going to be part of the ACC, you would have laughed at me. And so we have to understand the complexion has changed and stay abreast of it. I do think the best thing for college sports is to have 4 strong conferences. But right now, there is a very big disparity between the revenue that's generated from the SEC and the Big Ten. And so, we talk a lot about, hey, we want to be elite. We want to maintain a certain level of competitiveness. We don't want to have to lean on our donors all the time to try to bail us out. And so one of the biggest drivers of revenue is your conference distribution. So I think we're hopeful, and there's been some steps taken even with the ACC with disparate revenue distribution that I think will continue to help. But I do think it's something that we have to pay attention to going forward to make sure that UNC is put in the best place to succeed as possible.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we have to be really good. We continue to be great in our Olympic sport programs. We have to be good and competitive in football and basketball, and we'll always have a spot. I do think there's probably more iterations of conference realignment coming at some point. I don't know if right now they're debating 12 teams, 16 teams, 24 teams in the college football playoff. I think that has something to do with it. The SEC says, look, if they can't figure out what the national standards are for rules, maybe we'll go do something on our own. I don't know what the reality of that is. Right now, there's 361 teams in Division I. There's 130 that are in the FBS, the Football Bowl subdivision. Does that change? Is there a separate division within the FBS, and instead of having one division, you have 2, and you break that a little bit? All of those things I think we have to pay attention to. But, Steve mentioned the primary driver now are media rights. So I think you do have to pay attention to media rights and see what your options are. I've always thought that if we're going to have big conferences, we should be really big. So if we went to 32 in our league and you had 4 groups of 8, then you could play more regional competition and then only get together at the end of the year. So maybe something like that could work if the 4 conferences went to 2. and you had more regional play, I think something like that could work longer term. It's better than what we have currently. Coast to coast is just not a good thing for anybody. The West Coast kids absolutely hate it. And, you know, if you ask our kids, hey, would you like to go to Cal or Stanford once or twice in your 4-year career? Say, heck yeah, I'd like to do that. But if you're Stanford and say, hey, you got to play 14 volleyball games on the East Coast, they don't want to do that. They're not going to want to do that for another 10 years.
You know, all that we've been talking about may prove to be an avalanche in one day. I'm not quite sure me or these kind folks totally understand. What's a normal day for you guys? Take us through a day. Take us through a day that you might find would be a nice example of my role as athletic director on Monday.
You want to start?
There is no normal.
That's what, yeah. It's an oxymoron.
You're driving to work you're going to bed on Sunday night, you're driving to work on Monday, and you're thinking, what is it this week? There's likely to be something this week that's going to consume my activities. I always like to, my wife and my son here and my daughter here can tell you, I like to arrive at the office really early. I like some time to get my mind set and get my day organized, because if I came in at 8, then nothing was going to be organized. You're likely that day to have a meeting with a coach. It's not always the basketball coach or the football coach. It's about a coach who needs something, who's got a staff issue, who wants to talk about. You're likely to have 3 or 4 meetings that probably every one of them goes on too long because you're not getting anything done, but they need you there. You're likely to have to go across campus for some kind of meeting that's important, that the chancellor thinks that you be there and that you represent the athletic department. There's no time for correspondence during the day. That's the way it was with me. That was all at night. The enormous amount of time you spend on the telephone. I mean, you walk into your office and you got those daggone pink slips that just grow. I mean, they have babies every day. It's unbelievable what they do. So I don't know. For me, you say, well, another problem, but one of the challenges for me that I liked was solving problems. It was okay. Let's bring this problem in here. We got a good staff. Let's pull our heads together. Let's see if we can sort out how we can create a win-win situation. And when that happens, that's the sort of the value of the job, that you've created a resource for somebody to go out and do a job better than they did it the day before, or that you created something for a student athlete to engage in and grow and develop from. That's the value of the job.
Bubba or Steve?
I think he nailed it. And it is very, very different every single day. And we had 18 sports when I was at Tulsa, and they said it was just for the coaches, not necessarily for the administrators, but it's like shotgun start at golf. So everybody's on a different hole, and they get some that hit it down the fairway, some are in the bunker, some are in the rough, and you're like, ooh, you're just figuring out which one you're going to try to handle next. But it's fun. The other thing that is great about the job are the student athletes and the coaches. And so, we had Airing House training table. We have training table now. And so it's a great reminder, and I encourage Steve to do it. And Steve's really good at going to lunch at training table and seeing the student athletes. And that gives you a reminder of why you're doing what you're doing. Go to practice and watch them practice. And then obviously at night when you go to the competitions, it really makes it really a lot of fun. So the problems and things that you're working and trying to solve, you have an idea of why you're doing it. And so the more time you can spend with student athletes and coaches, the better. But these jobs kind of pull you away from it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is just kind of chaotic, but it's just a series of meetings that starts early and doesn't end. You could fill your whole day just with meetings, whether it's doing something with UNC Health, whether it's on academics. One thing I appreciated that actually both of these guys gave me advice on is to say, you've got to manage your schedule and make sure that you don't overcommit. But there's 2 things that you should always make time for no matter what, is if a student or a student athlete reaches out to have contact, to have a conversation, always accept that. And if any coach reaches out to you, those are your two primary responsibilities. And so today, of all things, I had a conversation with actually a Duke student who's dating one of our volleyball players because he had reached out for advice and guidance on it. And I think if you can kind of keep those up there, it's helpful to kind of manage your schedule. I will say, and this is not specific to athletic directors, this is just the athletic department staff, so I started my career in the legal world, and lawyers work long hours. I pivoted to professional sports, and in a sport that had 38 race weekends that you're traveling all the time. And I thought that I knew how hard people worked in both of those professions. And I get here and I watch the staff at UNC, because our staff is not nearly as big as some of these other schools, and what they do and the hours that they put in and the dedication that they have is incredible to me. I have never been around a group that works that hard or that long. And now, to be fair, some of it, we might be working last night at 9 o'clock because you're attending a baseball game. So it's a little bit different than just sitting behind a desk, but the kind of the dedication that you see from that group, to me, is just incredible. I'm in awe. I mean, it's very easy to be inspired and to work long hours when you see what everybody else is doing.
How many athletic events would you say you guys attended in the space of a week? And I will say this. I work with ESPN, so I'm at a lot of these events. They were always there. And not just for a quarter or for a half. They were there. They saw the entire event. They visited with the team and the coach afterwards. An incredible amount of time. Any estimation of the amount of events or hours?
Whatever was happening on campus, I mean, yeah, I wanted to be there. Watching the competition was truly the fun. Knowing some of the student athletes, having maybe been involved a little bit in their recruiting, and then go see them participate. And people, by and large, they left you alone while you were watching, so that was a good part too. It was a little bit of an escape, yeah.
I think that part of the job is the reward, right? That's why we do it, because you love sports and you get nice access and you get to go to sit at these events and say that you're working. I think we had a day a couple weeks ago, and Alan, Dickie's son, and Alan and Hannah were with me. I think we started at noon at women's lacrosse, may have gone to baseball right after that, hit a little bit of softball, and then came back for the men's lacrosse. So I think it went from like 12 to 7. You saw 4 different sporting events.
And just go back and sleep in your office and wake up the next morning?
Yeah, so it was, that's a special thing to be able to do. Sure. And I do think that it's important for folks in our role to make sure that you show up to support the coaches and the students. I mean, they work so hard in what they're doing, and I think that's part of our obligation.
Before you give Bubba a chance, I worry about young people with young families in our profession, not just as the head person, but associate ADs, assistants, or whatever. There's no such thing as a weekend. There's always something going on. There's always something to pull you away from your family. When I got into athletics, our kids were further along. They could go with us and enjoy. But for somebody who's got a younger set at home, it's a difficult life. I know y'all don't believe that, but it is so.
Yeah, no, but it's one of the few professions you can take your kids to work. So you do all that. Yeah. So, and you're patient. You're meeting with people all day, as Dickie indicated. So I like going because I like seeing the coaches and kids at the games. But the game, like the football and the basketball games where it's really loud, I like going because I can yell at the refs. I get a little tension out that way.
Now, you guys do have to meet as part of your responsibility for each day or periodically. You meet with faculty, is that correct? I mean, you keep touch with that aspect of being the student athlete?
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the daily grind, right? It's just that you build that in, and we have a great faculty committee, and that was one of the things Dickie said to me. Hey, they meet monthly. You need to be there all the time. Lisa Broom is fantastic, but it goes beyond that. Today I met with a professor in exercise and sports science because she just wanted to talk about what we were doing in athletics and talk about how her students could get involved. Vicky's now teaching a class, so I get to go speak at that class and call it dealing with faculty. So, but it's
Call me professor.
yeah, sorry.
I love the title, Professor of the Practice.
So, but it's
Something noble, it sounds about that.
It is very noble.
Yes?
and we've talked about continuing to try to integrate. There's a new provost who is a big advocate of sports and what it can do for the school, not only with the student athletes, but really it is the marketing arm of the school. And so we've talked about having more opportunities for actually the deans and the coaches to interact together. And if you think about it, they're both kind of the leaders of their independent businesses. And so I think there's a lot of ways that we can continue to do that. I know Bubba has relationships with, so many of the different faculty that he meets with them individually quite often.
I was blessed, really blessed to work with Dick Hiskey, Jack Evans, and Lisa Broom. I mean, such wonderful, wonderful people. And I look out in the audience and I see Gene and Joe and John. And yeah, to me, it was if you can imagine enjoying meeting with faculty, I mean, how crazy can you be, right? But I got preparation by working with 50 faculty in the School of Law for 3 years. And I figured if I could get along with 50 law professors, I could get along with just about anybody. But I really did enjoy the faculty athletic committee. And during my time, we put 4 task force together, look at academics, our drug policy, our budget, and the other one, our public relations. And half the people on those task force were faculty people. So the athletic department was gaining from involvement with faculty. That's the way we looked at it.
Yeah, the Faculty Athletics Committee, as you mentioned, faculty rep Lisa Broom has been terrific. 15 years, or more than that now. Jack was 20 or so. How many years was Jack the faculty athletic rep?
Oh, about a dozen, probably. Yeah.
So, and same thing, we've had a lot of consistency in those relationships. And when I first got here, Holden asked me to be part of the Faculty Leadership Institute or something. And so there were about 10 faculty members that all had to create a project and then present it to each other. And it was a great way for me to meet faculty across campus. Stan Ahut, who's now running our new data science program, was part of that class. So it was a relationship built a long time ago. And all of those things help because in athletics, we always ask for exceptions. We miss a lot of classes. Our student athletes miss a ton of classes. We have extra academic advisors, academic services. So we need to have great relationships because we're asking for a lot of special treatment for our student athletes. And so I think it's one of the biggest roles that the AD has is develop relationships across campus. Because we need them. We need them in academics, we need them in personnel, we need them in the budget office, we need it with facilities, we need it in the chancellor's office. We're always asking for special treatment because our kids are a little bit different than the rest of the student body, but we try to integrate them as much as we possibly can.
As challenging and as exhausting as the role can be, what aspect of being AD gives you the most joy, the most pleasure?
It's being with them when they compete and then seeing them when they come back. I mean, the stories of kids coming back and talking about their experiences here, some you don't want to hear when they tell you. Others are pretty good. But it really is just building those relationships. I think that's the best part about it, whether it's coaches or the kids.
Yeah. I think it's interacting with the students and the student athletes and the coaches. And I know we've hit on that theme throughout here, but you just watch the exuberance and then you also learn so much from these kids. I mean, they're balancing stuff that at least I didn't have to deal with, and they're elite athletes in elite programs. They are conquering the academic side, and they're still trying to adapt from a social perspective. And it hit home for me. I attended my first Rammies a couple nights ago, which is the end of the year student athlete award ceremony. And I know there were several hundred, 300-400 student athletes all completely dressed up, and the women wearing their dresses, men in suits and tuxes, and they're just awards for the student athletes. And then there's a bunch of fun games. It's hosted by student athletes. And they did little things like, hey, most of the athletes out here at halftime don't get to see the activities that go on during halftime because they're in the locker room. So we're going to do all these things. We're going to putt, we're going to do the chicken toss and all that, and they did a T-shirt toss. And this was one of the most, it was very entertaining, but it was reaffirming about what we do. So some of the student athletes on stage start throwing these free $3 T-shirts out into the crowd. And you watch all these student athletes start diving over the chairs, knocking each other out of the way. Now, these are kids that get free gear all the time.
Right.
And it was just a reminder that they're still kids at heart.
Freddie, I mentioned joy in problem solving. I enjoyed watching the staff that put together, watching it operate, whether it be in events or whatever, just seeing them putting their hearts and souls into it and seeing it work and sharing their excitement that it was working. But I'd say my supreme joy was sharing it with my wife and family and friends. Just there's things, there are perks, special seating, whatever, going to baseball games. I enjoyed my family and friends enjoying that with me. That was the cool part.
There are perks. You forgot parking.
Parking, yeah.
I was growing up really young in the business, and I was in charge of parking. And I come home from a game one time, and our kids are like 3, 5, 7. I don't know how old they are. They said, "Dad, we don't like that parking." I said, "What do you mean?" "Well, they kept going like this. We want them to go like this." I'm like, "Are you kidding me?"
Yeah.
As time draws nigh, and please forgive, we've had such wonderful discussion here amongst these three. We probably will not be able to entertain questions, and I apologize for that. But as we draw nigh, approaching the 9 o'clock hour, what do you three gentlemen see as the future of Carolina athletes or athletics?
I see it bright. With Bubba's leadership and passing it to Steve, I feel great about it. I think the institution wants a first-class program. It's going to demand a first-class program. And I see that as healthy, and I see us competing well. And by the way, Steve, I see us staying in the Atlantic Coast Conference.
I hope so. I hope so. I hope it still exists.
Yeah, Dickie, I share your enthusiasm for it. I agree. Carolina's brand is too good. The sports are too good. It means too much to the community. And quite frankly, it means too much to the country. The best brands buoy colleges, universities, and the television package. The big brands have to be good. The basketball tournament, the CFP, when the big brands are good, it's good for everybody. And we are one of those great brands. And we do it the Carolina way. We do it in a way that really makes this place proud. And I think you mentioned it early. The broad-based programming, our women's programs, the Olympic sports are really what really set us apart from everybody else. And that's really important. And I think we'll continue to do, I know we'll continue to do that. And I just feel really good about it. We talked, I don't know how long we've talked about the money and the challenges and all that. We talk to our student athletes 2% of the time about that. We talk to them all about their experiences as students and as athletes and what can we do to make that experience better. And so I don't want, and Steve mentioned it earlier, I don't want anybody to think that it's doom and gloom. It is really, we're on a great trajectory and will continue to be that way because of our coaches and because of our kids.
I believe we're extremely well positioned. We have massive challenges that everybody has because of the evolving collegiate landscape, but I'm fairly confident that we'll be able to navigate them because we have massive support system. And I think one thing that's real important that we actually haven't touched upon is we have great alignment up and down the ladder within the UNC system. And so that's actually something that's rare. When I've talked to a lot of other athletic directors, they've had struggles with boards, with chancellors, with some of the presidents not understanding the value that athletics brings. We actually don't have that. We have external challenges. We've got support from the South Building, the Board of Governors, Board of Trustees. So up and down the ladder, I think there's a recognition of what athletics brings to the university, some from a marketing perspective, but also the caliber and quality of kids that come out of these programs and what they go on to do. But one thing that probably maybe could almost close this with this fact is most of you guys are familiar with the Learfield Cup. It's had a number of different names, but it's the kind of the compilation in the fall of who has accumulated the most points based on all of their sports together. And UNC, this is obviously under Bubba's leadership, in the fall was first among all the schools in Division I. Through the winter was first among all Division I schools. So we're now just trying to see how we're doing spring. And when you look at how we're performing in baseball, women's lacrosse, men's lacrosse, women's tennis, I think we're positioned really well.
Final question. What makes being AD at this place, at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, unique? What makes it special?
To me, it's pretty simple. It's the caliber of coaches, student athletes, and academics. I think other schools out there have, can tout one of those. I don't think there are many, if any at all, that have the high level of coaches, student athletes with the academic reputation and the academic prowess that we have.
I think it's the how we do things. Bubba mentioned the Carolina way. It's very much alive. That matters to us at the university, how we go about doing things. And so I think it makes us very unique. I think the commitment to 28 sports, we're not alone in that, but we're unique in that. And I know under Steve's leadership, we'll continue that.
Yeah, what they said is absolutely spot on. And in addition to that, somehow, some way, and I think it's the magic of the place, magic of the coaches, whatever it is, we far exceed on the playing fields. We win disproportionately to our budget. And I don't know how those coaches do it, but when you come, you've seen it, both of you have seen how we fund our programs compared to Texas, Michigan, Ohio State, yet we compete exceptionally well with them. We punch way beyond our weight, and I think that makes this place really unique and special, and I think our coaches appreciate it.
Freddie, I'd like to say to you,
sure,
I don't know anybody else who could have made this happen. You are unique. You wanted to know what was unique. You're the unique one.
Thank you.
You just got a big award this past week, and it's so well earned, and we appreciate you, my friend.
Thank you, Dickie.
Yeah.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Bubba. As I said on those occasions, and particularly on Friday, I am flattered, I am honored, I am humbled, and I am blessed to be associated with this university, with our programs, and with individuals and people like this. We are in good hands. We are in good hands, and athletically, it's because of people right here. Thank you all for an evening. Thank you. Class dismissed. Thank you for coming.